30 cars drove past the dying baby on that frozen Minnesota highway. 30 people who saw the parents screaming and kept their foot on the gas. But the one man who stopped, the one man who held that blue-lipped infant in his tattooed hands and breathed life back into her lungs, was wearing a Hell's Angels patch and had killed a man in Reno. Before we dive in, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because we tell stories about real American protectors. The kind of men who don't wear capes but wear leather, and who prove that heroes come from the most unexpected places. Now, let's get into the story. 60 years old, and the cold don't bother you the way it used to. Or maybe you just stopped giving a damn. Iron. Armstrong twisted the throttle, and the Harley's engine growled back, a sound like thunder trapped in steel. Highway 61 stretched out before him, a ribbon of black ice cutting through the Minnesota pines. 18 degrees. The wind off Lake Superior was sharp enough to peel skin, but Armstrong barely felt it anymore. His fingers were numb inside his leather gloves, had been for the last 20 miles. That was fine. Numb was better than feeling. 25 years he'd worn the patch on his back, the winged death's head, the rocker that said Duluth in bold letters. The Hells Angels didn't recruit Boy Scouts, and Armstrong had never pretended to be one. He'd done time. 18 months in Stillwater for aggravated assault. Some punk had pulled a knife on a prospect, and Armstrong had put him through a windshield. His wife died while he was inside. Cancer didn't wait for parole hearings. His son stopped taking his calls after the funeral. The club was all he had left. The Brotherhood, the road, the engine's heartbeat matching his own, mile after frozen mile, until the day came when only one of them kept beating. Armstrong figured that day was coming soon. He'd made his peace with it. The orange hazard lights cut through the gray dusk like a warning. A sedan, dead on the shoulder, steam rising from the hood. Armstrong's first instinct was to gun it past. Let the state troopers handle it. He wasn't AA. He wasn't a goddamn Samaritan. He was... Then he saw the man. Young, maybe 30. Running into the middle of the icy road, arms waving like a madman, risking his own life to flag down anyone who'd stop. Behind him, a woman had collapsed by the rear tire. She was holding something small, something wrapped in pink. Armstrong's hand hovered over the throttle. Every car on this stretch had blown past them. Too cold, too dangerous, too scary. His jaw tightened. Something in his chest, some old instinct from Vietnam, from the medevac tent where he'd learned to read the difference between panic and death, kicked hard. He pulled onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under his boots. The engine died. Silence rushed in like water filling a grave. And then he heard it. Not screaming, worse, praying. The woman's voice, high and breaking, begging God for something Armstrong knew God rarely gave. He swung his leg off the bike. Whatever was in those pink blankets wasn't moving, and Armstrong knew he was already too late. David's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold his phone. No signal, no bars. Nothing but the endless gray stretch of Highway 61 and the pine trees closing in like prison walls. "Sarah, baby, someone's stopping." His wife didn't look up. She was rocking back and forth on the frozen gravel, holding Tia against her chest, whispering the same prayer over and over. "Please, God. Please, God. Please, God." The baby had stopped crying 10 minutes ago. That was worse. So much worse than the screaming. David heard the motorcycle engine die. Heavy boots crunching gravel, getting closer. He turned. His blood went cold. The man coming toward them was a giant, 6'3", maybe 250, all of it solid and scarred. A leather vest covered in patches, skulls, flames, the words "Hell's Angel" stitched across his back in bold letters. His beard was gray and wild, his arms covered in ink that looked like it had been carved with a knife. Skull rings on every finger. David stepped in front of Sarah. His voice cracked. "Please, we don't have any money." The biker didn't stop, didn't slow down. His boots kept coming, steady and deliberate, like a man who'd walked through fire before and wasn't impressed. "I don't want your money, son." The voice was deep, gravel and diesel and something else, something that made David think of his own father, dead 10 years now, the way he used to sound when he was about to fix something broken. But this wasn't his father. This was a Hell's Angel. This was... The biker knelt beside Sarah. She flinched, clutching Tia tighter. But the man's hands were already moving, peeling off his gloves, reaching for the baby. "Give me the girl." "No, please. She's sick. She needs a hospital. She needs air." Armstrong's eyes locked onto Sarah's. They were gray, tired, but steady. "Right now, she ain't breathing. You want to watch her die, or you want to let me help?" Sarah's hands trembled. She looked down at Tia. Her baby's lips were blue. Her tiny chest wasn't moving. She handed her over. Armstrong took the infant in his massive, tattooed hands. 3 months old, maybe 8 pounds. She looked like a doll in his grip, fragile, breakable, already broken. Her head lolled back. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, the whites showing. Febrile seizure. He'd seen it in the field. Kids spiking high fevers, airways blocked by reflux or vomit. If you didn't clear it fast, brain damage. If you didn't clear it at all... He tilted her head back, opened her tiny mouth with his pinky finger. There, mucus, thick and blocking her throat. David watched, frozen, as the biker's thick finger, decorated with a silver skull ring, disappeared into his daughter's mouth. Delicate, surgical, the same hands that had probably broken jaws and noses, now working with the precision of a jeweler. Armstrong hooked the blockage, cleared it. The woods went silent. Sarah stopped breathing. David's heart stopped. And then, nothing. The baby didn't move. Armstrong's jaw tightened. He placed 2 fingers on her sternum and pressed. Once. Twice. "Come on, baby girl," he muttered. "Don't you quit on me." He pressed again. Still nothing. And then he did something that made Sarah gasp. He put his mouth over Tia's nose and mouth and breathed. The air left Armstrong's lungs and filled hers. Gentle, controlled, just enough to inflate those tiny, fragile lungs without rupturing them. He pulled back, watched her chest rise, fall. Nothing. He breathed again. Sarah's fingernails dug into David's arm. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed to stop, waiting for a verdict from God or the devil, whoever was listening. Armstrong's hands, scarred knuckles, faded prison ink spelling iron across the fingers, skull rings catching the last gray light, cradled Tia's head with the tenderness of a man holding something holy. The contrast was obscene, beautiful, terrifying. A biker who'd spent 2 decades breaking bones, now trying to save one fragile life with hands built for destruction. He tilted her head back again, checking the airway. Clear. He pressed his ear to her chest, listened. Heartbeat. Faint. But there. Come on, baby girl," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "You got more fight in you than this." He rubbed her sternum with his thumb, firm, circular motions. An old medic trick from Quezon, 1969, when he was 20 years old and still believed saving people mattered. David's voice cracked. "Is she—" "Shut up." Armstrong didn't look up. His focus was absolute. "She's in there. She's just scared." His pinky finger, the one with the death's head ring, stroked the side of her tiny neck, stimulating, coaxing. The tattoo on his forearm, a snake wrapped around a dagger, flexed as his muscles tensed. Sarah watched those hands. Hands that looked like they'd strangled men. Hands that looked like they'd held guns and knives and God knew what else. Hands that were now holding her daughter like spun glass. Armstrong breathed into Tia's mouth again. Once, twice, and then a flutter. Her chest moved on its own. Just a little. Just enough. Armstrong froze. "There you go. That's it. That's my girl." Another breath. Stronger this time. And then her tiny body convulsed. She coughed. A wet, choking sound. And suddenly her mouth opened wide. The scream that came out was the most beautiful thing Armstrong had ever heard. Tia wailed, loud, angry, alive. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. David's legs gave out. He sat hard on the frozen gravel, hands covering his face. Armstrong held the screaming infant against his chest, one massive hand supporting her head, the other rubbing her back as she sucked in air and shrieked her rage at the cold, cruel world that had almost taken her. "Yeah," he muttered, a smile cracking his weathered face. "You tell 'em, sweetheart. You tell the whole damn world." Her tiny fist grabbed onto his leather vest, held on. And that's when Armstrong heard it. Sirens, blue lights cutting through the trees. And he knew what was coming next. Tia's screams echoed through the pine trees like a fire alarm in a cathedral, high-pitched, furious, alive. Armstrong had heard a lot of sounds in his 60 years. Gunshots, sirens, the wet crack of bones breaking, his wife's last breath in a hospital room he'd never been allowed to enter. But this was the sound of God changing his mind. "She's cold," Armstrong said, his voice cutting through Sarah's sobs. "Fever broke, but now she's gonna crash. Hypothermia." He didn't wait for permission. He unzipped his leather cut, the sacred vest that marked him as a 1%er, the patch that had taken him years to earn, and pulled it open. His thermal undershirt was stained with oil and sweat, but it was warm. Body heat, the only thing that mattered. He pressed Tia against his chest, then wrapped the leather around her like a cocoon. The baby's screaming quieted to whimpers. Her tiny cheek rested against the faded eagle tattoo over his heart. Sarah watched, frozen. This man, this outlaw, this monster she'd been taught to fear her entire life, was cradling her daughter like she was made of prayer and moonlight. "How did you—" Sarah's voice broke. "How did you know what to do?" Armstrong kept his eyes on the baby. "Vietnam. 69. I was a combat medic before I was anything else." He stroked Tia's back with one calloused thumb. "Saw a lot of kids over there who needed help. Most of them didn't make it." He looked up. His gray eyes were wet. "This one did." Sarah's hand moved before her brain caught up. She reached out and touched his forearm, right over the snake tattoo, right over the scars. Her fingers were small and brown against his weathered, ink-stained skin. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Don't." Armstrong's voice was rough. "I didn't do anything special. You stopped." David stood, his legs still shaking. "Everyone else drove past. You stopped." The sirens were getting louder. Flashing blue lights painted the trees. Armstrong's jaw tightened. He knew how this looked. A Hell's Angel on a deserted highway, holding a black couple's baby. In his world, cops didn't ask questions first. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "When they get here, you tell them I helped. You make that real clear, understand? Otherwise this goes sideways fast." David nodded, understanding immediately. The ambulance skidded to a stop, gravel spraying. 2 paramedics jumped out. Behind them, a Minnesota State Troopers cruiser pulled up, lights blazing. Armstrong stood slowly, still holding Tia. The baby had stopped crying. She was looking up at him with unfocused eyes, her tiny fist still clutching his vest. The trooper's hand went to his sidearm. "Sir, step away from the child." Armstrong's eyes narrowed. Sarah scrambled to her feet. "No!" she shouted. "He saved her! He's with us!" The trooper kept his hand on his gun. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." "Officer." Armstrong's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who'd had guns pointed at him before. "The baby had a febrile seizure. Airway was blocked. I cleared it. She's stable now, but she needs a hospital." The paramedics moved forward. Armstrong handed Tia over gently, his hands lingering for just a moment on her small body before letting go. One of the paramedics, a woman in her 40s, checked Tia's vitals. Her eyes widened. "Jesus," she breathed. "You did infant CPR?" Armstrong nodded. She looked at his patches, his beard, his skull rings. "Where'd you learn that?" "Long time ago," Armstrong said. "Different war." The paramedic's expression softened. She'd seen enough veterans to recognize one. "You saved her life." The trooper finally moved his hand away from his gun. Sarah wrapped her arms around Armstrong's waist, burying her face in his chest. He stood there, awkward, his massive arms hovering in the air like he'd forgotten how to hug someone. David extended his hand. Armstrong shook it. "We don't even know your name," David said. Armstrong looked at the ambulance, at Tia, now wrapped in thermal blankets, pink returning to her cheeks. "Doesn't matter," he said. He walked back to his Harley, mounted up. The engine roared to life. Sarah called after him. "Wait, please, how do we find you?" But Armstrong was already gone, his tail light disappearing into the dark woods. He didn't leave his name. He didn't leave his number. He left thinking he'd never see them again. He was wrong. 2 weeks later, Armstrong was under the hood of a '72 Shovelhead when he heard boots on gravel. He didn't look up. The clubhouse on the edge of Duluth wasn't the kind of place people wandered into by accident. Chain-link fence, razor wire, a sign that read, "Private property," in letters big enough to see from the road. If someone was walking through that gate, they either had a death wish or business with the Brotherhood. "We're closed," Armstrong grunted, elbow deep in engine grease. "I'm looking for someone." Armstrong froze. He knew that voice. Young, nervous. The kind of nervous that came from standing somewhere you didn't belong. He straightened up slowly, wiping his hands on a red shop rag, turned around. David stood 10 feet away, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, shoulders hunched against the November cold. He looked smaller here, surrounded by Harleys and men in leather, out of place, vulnerable. But he was here. "How'd you find me?" Armstrong's voice was flat, not hostile, just careful. Asked around town. Big biker with a gray beard who rides a '98 Fat Boy. Turns out there's only one of you. David pulled something from his pocket. A card. Homemade. Construction paper with crayon drawings. My wife, Sarah. She wanted me to give you this. Armstrong took it. His thick fingers looked ridiculous holding something so delicate. On the front, someone had drawn a stick figure with a beard next to a tiny stick figure baby. Inside, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for giving us our miracle. We will never forget you." Below that, a Polaroid was taped to the card. Tia, awake, alert, smiling at the camera in a hospital gown covered in cartoon bears. Armstrong stared at the photo. His throat tightened. "She's okay?" His voice came out rough. "More than okay. Doctor said if you'd been 30 seconds later." David's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "They said you saved her brain. Not just her life. Her whole future." Armstrong looked at the picture for a long time. Behind him, the clubhouse door opened. 3 brothers stepped out onto the porch. Tank, Reaper, and Chains. Big men. Scarred men. They watched the scene with the quiet intensity of wolves deciding if something was prey or not. David noticed them. His Adam's apple bobbed, but he didn't run. "We want to see you again," David said. "Sarah and I. We want you to meet Tia properly. When she's not, dying." Armstrong's jaw worked. "Kid, you don't owe me anything." "I know." David met his eyes. "That's not why we're asking." The wind picked up, rattling the chain link. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn bellowed. Armstrong looked down at the photo again, at Tia's smile. He'd spent 25 years believing he didn't deserve second chances. That redemption was for other men. Better men. But that baby's tiny fist had grabbed his vest and held on. Like she'd been trying to tell him something. Like she'd been trying to say, "You're not done yet." "Where?" Armstrong asked quietly. David's face lit up. "Our place. Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy. Just," he hesitated, "just family." Family. The word hit Armstrong like a fist to the chest. Behind him, Reaper called out, "You gonna let some citizen tell you what to do, Prez?" Armstrong turned his head, looked at his brothers. His face was stone. "This citizen's got bigger balls than most of you. Walked into our house to say thank you. That's respect." He turned back to David. "Sunday. What time?" 5 o'clock. I'll text you the address." David pulled out his phone. Armstrong rattled off his number, the same digits he'd had for 15 years, the number his own son had blocked. As David walked back toward the gate, Armstrong called after him. "Hey." David turned. "The baby, Tia. She really okay?" David smiled. "She's perfect." Armstrong nodded once, watched David disappear down the street. Then he walked back to the clubhouse, opened the door, ignored the stares from his brothers. He went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, moved aside the 12-pack of Coors and the leftover Chinese. And right there, between the mustard and the beer list, he taped the Polaroid. Tia's face, smiling. Tank walked in, grabbed a beer, looked at the photo. "The hell is that?" "That," Armstrong said quietly, "is the reason I still believe in God." Tank grunted and walked out. Armstrong stood there for a long moment, staring at the picture. And for the first time in 12 years, since his wife's funeral, since his son walked away, Armstrong smiled. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Armstrong stood on the porch of a small ranch house in the suburbs, holding a bottle of wine he'd bought at the gas station. He felt ridiculous. A 60-year-old outlaw, scrubbed clean, beard combed, wearing his best black button-down shirt, and still wearing the vest. He'd promised himself he wouldn't hide who he was. The door opened before he could knock. Sarah stood there, Tia on her hip. The baby was bigger now, healthy. Her cheeks were full and brown, her eyes bright and curious. She was wearing a onesie that said, "Daddy's Girl" in pink letters. When she saw Armstrong, she didn't cry, didn't flinch. She reached for him. Sarah laughed, tears already in her eyes. "She remembers you." Armstrong's hands trembled as he took Tia. She was heavier than that night on the highway, stronger. She grabbed his beard immediately, tugging hard enough to hurt. "Yeah," he rumbled, his voice thick. "You got a grip, little girl." David appeared behind Sarah, apron tied around his waist, smelling like garlic and roasted chicken. Come in. Don't just stand there." The house was small but warm. Pictures on every wall, family photos, baby milestones, a framed photo of Martin Luther King Jr. above the mantel. Gospel music played softly from a radio in the kitchen. The dining table was set for 3, with a 4th plate added hastily. Armstrong sat on the couch, Tia still clutching his beard. She babbled at him, nonsense sounds but insistent, like she was telling him a very important story. "She's been like this all day," Sarah said, sitting beside him. "Excited, like she knew you were coming." Armstrong stared down at the baby. This tiny human who should have died in his arms, who'd grabbed his vest and decided he was worth holding on to. "How old is she now?" he asked quietly. 4 months next week." Sarah touched his arm. "The doctor said there's no brain damage, no developmental delays. She's perfect. Because of you." Armstrong shook his head. "I just did what anyone would." "No!" David's voice cut through from the kitchen doorway. He was holding a wooden spoon, his expression serious. "You did what no one else did. 30 cars passed us that night. 30. You were the only one who stopped." The oven timer beeped. David disappeared back into the kitchen. Sarah leaned closer. "Can I ask you something?" Armstrong nodded. "Why did you stop? Really?" Armstrong was quiet for a long time. Tia had fallen asleep against his chest, her tiny hand still tangled in his beard. He could feel her heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive. "I got a son," he said finally. "Haven't spoken to him in 12 years. He thinks I'm a monster. Maybe he's right. But when I saw your husband in that road, waving his arms, risking his life for his baby," his voice cracked. "I thought about all the times I wasn't there. All the times I chose the club over family. All the mistakes I made." He looked down at Tia. "I couldn't drive past. Not this time." Sarah's hand covered his. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. Dinner was pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked with bacon, comfort food, the kind of meal that tasted like home. Armstrong couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him. The clubhouse had a freezer full of TV dinners and a lot of beer. This was different. This was love on a plate. They talked about Duluth, about David's job at the rail yard, about Sarah's online degree in nursing, about Tia's first laugh, her first time sleeping through the night. Normal stuff, family stuff. Armstrong listened more than he talked. He wasn't used to this, being welcomed, being wanted, being treated like he belonged somewhere other than a dive bar or a courtroom. After dinner, Sarah brought out dessert, apple pie, homemade, and then, as Armstrong was finishing his second slice, Sarah said the words that would change everything. "We've been talking," she said, glancing at David, "and we want to ask you something important." Armstrong set down his fork. Sarah took a breath. "We want you to be Tia's godfather." The room went silent, except for the gospel music playing softly in the background. Armstrong stared at her. "What?" "Her godfather," David repeated. "At her christening, next month. We want you to stand up in front of the church and promise to look after her, to be part of her life." Armstrong's hands gripped the table edge. I can't. I'm not. "You're exactly who we want," Sarah said firmly. "You're the reason she's alive." Armstrong shook his head. "I ain't a church man. I got a record. "You're the man who saved our daughter," David said. "That's all that matters." Armstrong looked at Tia, asleep in the bassinet by the couch. So small, so perfect, so fragile. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Sarah reached across the table and took his weathered, scarred hand in both of hers. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but she deserves you." And Armstrong, Iron Armstrong, Hell's Angel, ex-con, man who'd spent 60 years building walls around his heart, broke. A single tear rolled down into his gray beard. "When?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah smiled. 3 weeks. First Baptist Church, Sunday morning." Armstrong nodded slowly. "I'll wear the vest." "We wouldn't want it any other way," David said. Armstrong looked at them both. This young couple who'd looked past the patches and the scars and the prison time. Who'd seen something in him worth saving. Who'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever. A family. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I'll do it." Sarah squeezed his hand. Outside, the Minnesota wind howled, but inside, everything was warm. Armstrong stared at his son's number on the screen like it was a ghost. His finger hovered over the green button. 12 years. 12 years of silence. And the call came now. Right when Sarah was asking him to be a godfather, right when someone finally saw him as something other than a monster. He declined the call, shoved the phone back in his pocket. "I can't do this," Armstrong said, his voice rough as gravel. "I ain't a church man. I ain't a role model." Sarah didn't let go of his hand. "We're not asking for perfect. You don't understand." Armstrong pulled his hand away, gently but firmly. "I killed a man once. Reno, 87. Bar fight. He died in a coma 3 days later." He looked at David. "I did 4 years for it." David didn't flinch. "There's more," Armstrong continued, his voice dropping. "Aggravated assault. Weapons charges. I sold drugs for the club. Ran guns across state lines. I spent 18 months in Stillwater while my wife died of cancer alone." His jaw tightened. "My own son won't speak to me. Hasn't in 12 years. You really want a man like that making promises to God about your daughter?" The room went silent. Even the gospel music seemed to fade. Tia stirred against his chest, making a soft cooing sound in her sleep. Sarah leaned forward. Her eyes were steady, unwavering. "You breathed life back into her," she said quietly. "When everyone else drove past, you stopped. You held her. You saved her." She touched Armstrong's arm. "God used your hands that night. That makes you family. That makes you worthy." Armstrong's throat tightened. A tear rolled down into his gray beard before he could stop it. "I don't know how to be what you need," he whispered. "You already are," David said. "Look at her." Armstrong looked down. Tia had opened her eyes. She was staring up at him with that unfocused baby gaze, her tiny fist still wrapped around a piece of his leather vest. Not afraid. Not crying. Just holding on. Like she knew something he didn't. Armstrong's chest heaved once. Then again. The dam he'd built for 60 years. The one that kept him numb, kept him moving, kept him from feeling anything that might break him. Cracked. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "Okay. I'll do it." Sarah's smile could have lit up the whole damn state. "But I got one condition," Armstrong added, looking up. His eyes were red, but his voice was steel. "I wear the vest, the patches, all of it. I won't hide who I am." David extended his hand across the table. "We wouldn't want it any other way." Armstrong shook it, felt the weight of the promise settle on his shoulders like armor. Outside, a car door slammed, then another. Armstrong's phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Tank at the clubhouse. "Feds are here, looking for you. Said it's about Reno." Armstrong's blood went cold. The feds had come for ghosts. Reno, 1987. The case had been closed for 30 years, but some ambitious prosecutor wanted to reopen it. They'd questioned Armstrong for 6 hours at the clubhouse. Chains had called a lawyer. By dawn, it was over. Insufficient evidence, witnesses dead or disappeared, statute of limitations on everything except the original conviction. They'd found nothing. Armstrong was free. 3 weeks later, he stood on the steps of First Baptist Church under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The sun was warm on his leather vest. The patches, the death's head, the rocker, the years of road, caught the light like badges of honor instead of shame. In his arms, Tia wore a frilly pink christening gown that made her look like a cloud. She was 6 months old now, big enough to grab his beard with both hands and laugh when he pretended it hurt. The congregation had gone silent when he'd walked in, an outlaw in their sanctuary. But Sarah and David had stood on either side of him, and the pastor, an old black man with kind eyes, had smiled and said, "All God's children are welcome here." Now on these steps, with the whole town watching, Armstrong looked down at Tia. She looked up at him, smiled. That toothless, pure, perfect smile that babies give when they see someone they love. A single tear rolled into his gray beard. He smiled back. A genuine, soft smile he didn't know he still had in him. Behind him, the rumble of Harleys filled the street. Tank, Reaper, Chains, and 15 other brothers from the club lined up along the curb. Not to intimidate. To celebrate. To witness one of their own become something they'd all thought impossible. A family man. Armstrong kissed Tia's forehead, whispered something only she could hear. The town watched. Some smiled, some whispered, some understood. That day, the Hell's Angel didn't earn his wings. He realized he was holding them in his arms all along. Because blood makes you related, but breathing life into someone, makes you family. If you believe that redemption isn't about erasing your past, but about who you choose to protect in the present, like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories about unlikely heroes and the families they save. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.